Hi, I'm Lena. I never thought love would make me choose between a warm home and a warm heartbeat. But then again, I never thought the person I was going to marry would look at my dog and see a problem instead of family. The first sign should have been the silence when I introduced them. When Daisy, my golden retriever, wagged her tail and leaned against his leg like she always did with people she liked, he didn't smile. He didn't lean down or scratch behind her ears. He just said, "She's big." That was the beginning. It didn't seem like much at the time, just an offhand comment after a long drive and a bad sandwich from the gas station. I told myself not everyone was a dog person. But it stayed with me. The way he said big like it was a burden, not a trait. We'd been together for 3 years. Engaged for 4 months. I was 29 and tired of sharing apartments with peeling paint and mismatched chairs. We had been saving for a house, both of us working long hours. Him in real estate, me in social media management. My job let me work from home, which was good for Daisy. She was rescued when she was just under a year old, skittish and rib bone thin, and she'd slept on my chest for weeks after I brought her home, like my heartbeat was the only thing convincing her to stay alive. I'd promised her then, whispered it into her fur during thunderstorms and bad dreams, that she'd never be abandoned again. And I meant it. The dream house wasn't a mansion. Just a cozy place with a sunroom and a backyard where Daisy could chase squirrels and roll in the grass. We'd driven past it by accident one afternoon when our appointment got rescheduled. The for sale sign looked hand-painted, slightly tilted. The house had charm. Personality. Like it knew it didn't belong to the slick catalog of overpriced suburban boxes we kept seeing. The moment I stepped onto the porch, I felt something in my chest loosen. He said the numbers were tight but doable. We could make it work if we trimmed down some extras. I thought he meant the espresso machine or maybe postponing the honeymoon. I didn't know he meant Daisy. It came up during dinner. We were at a small Italian place we both liked, the kind with flickering candles and lasagna that took 40 minutes to bake. I had just started talking about where the couch would go when he put down his fork and said, too casually, "We should talk about Daisy." I felt my stomach twist. He said things like she was a lot to manage, especially if we wanted to start a family soon. That her fur was everywhere. That the house had carpeted rooms, and a big dog like her would ruin that in months. That allergies ran in his family. That the mortgage would be easier without pet insurance, pet food, boarding during trips. He listed it all like it was logical, like love could be audited. I didn't say anything right away. I just looked at him, really looked at him. I'd spent 3 years memorizing this face, believing it was safety. Now it looked foreign, too smooth, too rehearsed. He said, "It's just a dog." And something inside me cracked. Daisy wasn't just a dog. She was a promise. She was 2 a.m. walks when my anxiety was a thunderstorm. She was the one being who had never once made me feel like I had to be less. She had waited for me at the door every day for 6 years like I was the best part of her world. I didn't say any of that. I nodded, changed the subject, paid the bill, but the thought festered. He brought it up again 2 days later, then again after that. Each time, it came wrapped in different packaging, logic, compromise, even love. "We're building a future, babe. Let's not let the past hold it back." He said it like Daisy was something I'd outgrown. Something I should have left behind with mismatched chairs and takeout containers. I didn't argue. I stopped mentioning her in house discussions. I stopped showing him photos of her doing goofy things during my workday. I smiled when he smiled. But inside, I was counting things. Every dollar I had ever spent on dog food. Every mile we ran together. Every night, she nudged my hand when I was too tired to care for myself, but not too tired to care for her. I was counting all the ways she had made my life livable. The day we signed the offer papers, he smiled like it was Christmas morning. He popped champagne. I poured one glass, then another. And that night, when he fell asleep on the couch with Zillow tabs still open on his laptop, I sat at the kitchen counter with Daisy's head in my lap and realized I felt nothing.
No joy. No pride.
Just a dull ache where something bright used to be. I had always imagined buying a house as a moment of triumph. But this felt like a surrender. Like I had made a trade. and I wasn't sure I could live with the price. A week before the final closing, I came home from the store and found him standing in the living room, a printed flyer in his hand. At first, I thought it was for moving company or maybe a furniture sale. Then I saw the heading, Loving Home Needed, Purebred Golden Retriever. My breath caught. I asked him where he got it. He said he'd made it. Just to see.
Just to put out feelers.
I don't remember what I said. I just remember Daisy standing between us, tail still wagging, confused. She didn't understand that someone had just put a price on her soul. That someone had tried to measure her worth in square footage and new flooring. That someone who claimed to love me thought he could take the beating heart out of my life and call it growing up. That night, I stayed up until 3. I sat with Daisy on the floor, sifting through old photos and emails and every saved message from the rescue center where I first found her. I read the intake form again. Found tied to a fence. Malnourished. Afraid of loud noises. I remembered what the vet had said. She might never fully trust people again. Be patient. And I had been. For 6 years. I had taught her that hands could feed, not hit. That voices could soothe, not scare. That love wasn't a trick. I had done that. Not him. Not anyone else.
Me.
I had rebuilt a soul. And now I was supposed to trade that in for a dream house with a stainless steel fridge and an open floor plan. So I made a decision. The next morning, I called the agent. Said we wanted to pull out. She was surprised, of course. But not shocked. Something in my voice, maybe. The agent said we'd lose a chunk of the deposit, but it wasn't everything. I said that was fine. I could live with losing money. I couldn't live with losing myself.
I didn't tell him that day.
I let the silence stretch. Let him keep planning his fantasy life without realizing it was already unraveling. He noticed the change, of course. Asked if I was okay. I said I was tired, which was true. Tired of pretending that giving up pieces of myself was part of the package. The call came 3 days later. He had gotten a message from the agent. He came into the room holding his phone like it was a weapon. He asked me why. I looked at him and said, because Daisy stays. He stared at me like I had spoken another language. Then he got angry. He said I was being irrational, that this was about a dog, that I was throwing away everything we had built. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just said, if you think Daisy is the problem, then you haven't been paying attention. He walked out. Said he needed time to think. I said okay. I didn't stop him. I sat back down on the floor with Daisy. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need explanations. She just rested her head on my knee like she always did, like I was still the best part of her world. And for the first time in weeks, I believed it again. The silence after he left didn't echo. It settled, low and thick, like fog in the corners of the apartment. I went about my morning slowly, feeding Daisy, brushing my teeth, replying to a few emails. Everything felt muted, like I was watching my own life on low volume. The space he had taken up still buzzed with memory. The coffee mug he left on the counter. The hoodie slung across the back of the chair. His presence clung to things, but not to me. I kept waiting to feel regret. All I felt was breath, full, deep, mine. Like I hadn't realized I'd been holding it for months. That afternoon, my best friend Misha came over with groceries and a look on her face that said she already knew. She hugged me, without asking questions. We sat on the floor, eating microwaved mac and cheese out of mugs, and I told her everything. The house, the flyer, the fight, the line I'd drawn. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she just said, good. And then after a pause, but you know this isn't over yet, right? I nodded. Because I did know. He wasn't the type to walk away quietly. 3 days passed. I didn't hear from him. Then the messages started coming. At first, just him, short and sharp. You overreacted. We can still fix this. Don't throw this away over a mutt. Then came the family. His mother, always polite to my face, now texting things like, I hope you realize what a mistake you're making. He deserves someone who supports him. A cousin I barely knew commented on one of my posts with a vague quote about priorities and immaturity. And finally, the cherry on top, a joint post on his Instagram, a filtered black and white photo of us at a wedding last fall, captioned, "When you give everything and it's still not enough." Some people don't know what love takes. Thousands of likes. Comments pouring in. Hearts, hugs, vague sympathy. He knew how to play the victim. He always had. But now he had an audience. I didn't respond. Not publicly, not privately. I logged off. I walked Daisy twice a day. I turned my phone face down. I made lentil soup from scratch and started rewatching old cooking shows just to hear something familiar in the background. I wasn't numb. I was thawing. Slowly.
Carefully.
But the twist came where I didn't expect it. A week later, my building's leasing office called. There was an issue, they said. The payment for the next month's rent had bounced. That didn't make sense. I had more than enough in my account. I logged in and there it was, a massive withdrawal from our joint savings. A transfer to an unfamiliar account, cleared the day before. I checked the account history. I hadn't authorized anything. I hadn't even logged in that day. I called the bank. Waited 43 minutes on hold. When I finally got through, the representative was polite, too polite. They said it was a previously approved internal transfer, linked to a house-related expense we'd registered when setting up our shared savings. Apparently, he had changed the account settings before the split, granting himself full access. Legally, it was still his money too. Ethically, it was theft. Emotionally, it was a knife. I hung up without saying much. Then I sat there, staring at the screen. I wasn't crying. I wasn't panicking. I was calculating. This wasn't a heartbreak anymore. It was a strategy match. And I had been passive for too long. I gathered everything. The house cancellation confirmation, the flyer he printed for Daisy, screenshots of his messages, the savings withdrawal, the Instagram post. I printed it all, labeled each part, tucked it into a file folder. I wasn't going to sue him. I wasn't even going to contact a lawyer. But I was done playing defense. I mailed a copy to myself. Dated and sealed. Just in case. That weekend I saw him. It wasn't planned. I was leaving the dog park when I caught a glimpse of his car, that slick black SUV he had bought last spring when he started making real money. He was parked across the street, windows down, talking to a woman I didn't recognize. She was laughing, flipping her hair, her hand on his arm. He didn't see me, or maybe he did, and didn't care. Either way, I walked past without looking back. But that night, I remembered the dinner we had a month into our relationship. How he'd looked at me across a candlelit table and said he'd never met anyone so grounded. I remembered how I believed him. On Monday, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered without thinking. It was a woman. She introduced herself as someone who had applied to adopt a dog named Daisy. My stomach dropped. She said she found my number on a copy of the flyer her neighbor had given her, a flyer still floating around the neighborhood. She thought the adoption was still open. She said her daughter had already picked out a leash. I barely managed to respond. I explained that Daisy wasn't up for adoption, that she had never been, that the flyer was a mistake. I apologized. She apologized. We hung up. I didn't sleep that night. The idea that someone, somewhere, still thought they could take her, that her place with me wasn't secure, it lit something in me I hadn't felt since college debate competitions.
Fire.
Not just to protect. To prove. The next morning, I drove straight to the nearest notary. I updated my will, my emergency contact list, and my pet guardianship forms. I listed Daisy as family. Legal, binding, documented. I wasn't taking chances anymore. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. The text slowed. The online digs faded. But I knew better. He wasn't done. And I was right. The final twist came when a letter showed up in my mailbox. It was handwritten, no return address. Just my name on the front in sharp, neat lettering. Inside, 2 pages. The first was an apology, or something like it. He said he had made mistakes. That he missed me. That Daisy wasn't the real issue, just a symptom of how different our priorities had become. He said he still loved me, that we could still build something. that I'd already proved how committed I could be, and he needed that again. It wasn't love. It was manipulation dressed in nostalgia. But it was the second page that mattered. It was a copy of a lease, a condo downtown, signed under his name only, dated a week after the house deal fell through.
He hadn't told me.
He had moved on, made plans, carved out a future without me in it, all while still trying to pull me back. The proof was in my hands. He didn't want me back. He just didn't want to lose. I folded the letter and put it in the drawer with the rest. Then I took Daisy on the longest walk we'd had in months. Down the Greenbelt Trail, past the dog park, through the neighborhood that still smelled like late summer. She chased a butterfly, rolled in a patch of clover. I sat on a bench and let the sun warm my face. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like something had been taken from me. I felt like I had been returned to myself. We walked home slowly. I made tea. Daisy curled up at my feet. I picked up a pen and opened a blank journal. At the top, I wrote the words I hadn't dared speak before. I'm not his anymore.
Imine.
Then I wrote everything I remembered about who I was before him and everything I had rediscovered since. The final twist didn't come from him. It came from me. The realization that maybe the dream house was never the dream. Maybe the real dream was peace, the kind that comes not from four walls and a mortgage, but from choosing yourself without apology. And I wasn't done choosing yet. The days began to feel quieter, but not empty. I wasn't floating anymore. I was rebuilding, slow, deliberate, like brushing dust off pieces of myself I didn't realize had been buried. Daisy and I fell into a rhythm. Morning walks, emails over coffee, work in the afternoons. I rearranged the apartment furniture. I donated half my closet. I swapped out old photos in the hallway for framed prints of wildflowers and sunrises and a grainy picture of Daisy sitting in a laundry basket, wrapped in one of my sweaters. Little things, but they added up. Like I was planting flags in my own life again, saying, I live here. I choose this. The unexpected message came on a Tuesday. A name I didn't recognize. An unfamiliar email address. The subject line read, You don't know me, but I think we need to talk. I almost deleted it. Then I opened it. Inside was a long message from a woman named Erin. She said she used to date him, my ex, years before we met. They had split abruptly. She said she had stumbled across the Instagram post he'd made about me and recognized a pattern. She said the guilt, the control, the twisting of narratives to suit his version of the story, she'd lived through it too. Then she said something that made my hands freeze over the keyboard. If he ever mentioned a previous engagement that ended out of nowhere, that was me. I left the day before our wedding. He told everyone I had a breakdown. I didn't. I found out about someone else. And I couldn't pretend anymore. I reread the email twice. It felt like someone had punched through glass and let the cold truth spill in. I remembered how he had once told me, over drinks one snowy night, that his ex had just lost it. That he had tried everything. I had nodded, comforted him, felt bad for him. But now the story had new cracks. Erin offered to talk. She didn't push. She just said, You're not crazy. You're not alone. I didn't reply right away. I sat with it. Thought about how many of my memories had been touched by his voice, his edits. Then I called Misha. She didn't say, I told you so. She just said, You ready to stop carrying this alone? And I was. We met Erin the next day, in a neutral cafe, with bad lighting and great scones. She was calm, grounded, nothing like the story he had painted of her. She told me more, how he had used money to keep her close, how he'd offered to pay off her student loans in exchange for control of her savings, how he'd planted seeds of doubt in her family, made her seem unreliable when she tried to pull away. It was all so eerily familiar that my stomach knotted. It wasn't just me. It had never been just me. When we left, Erin hugged me. Not a dramatic hug. A real one. The kind you give someone when you've seen the dark and want to leave a candle behind. I drove home in silence, Daisy riding shotgun, head out the window like always. And as I turned into my apartment lot, I saw his car again. parked in the shadow of the dumpster, too close to the curb, like he hadn't intended to stay long. My heart started to race, not from fear, but from fury. I pulled in and parked without turning off the ignition. He stepped out of his car, saw me, and raised a hand like he expected me to wave back. I didn't. He walked toward me, slow, like this was still his stage. I rolled down the window halfway. He started talking fast, too fast. Said he had been thinking. That he missed me. That he had acted out of stress. That he was willing to compromise. Keep Daisy if it meant having me back. He said he realized now how important she was. How important I was. I watched his mouth move and realized something terrifying and freeing at the same time. I didn't believe him. Not a word. Not a syllable. The man in front of me wasn't mourning a loss. He was losing control. And he didn't know how to function without it. I didn't say anything. I just stared. After a moment, his voice dropped. He said, "Don't make this ugly. I still have access to everything. Emails, bank records. You really want to go down that road?" That's when I smiled. Not out of joy. Out of power. Because I knew something he didn't. I had already locked everything down. Changed passwords. Opened a new account. Archived all receipts, contracts, voice memos, screenshots, even the flagged transfer from our joint savings account. I'd share the entire file with a lawyer friend. I had a timeline. I had backup. I had peace of mind, so I said calmly, "Try it." And I rolled up the window. That night I did cry. Not because I was sad, but because I had survived something I didn't have a name for until I was already out of it. It wasn't a breakup. It was a reclamation. 2 days later, I found out that the condo he moved into, it wasn't paid for. He'd used his parent help, and now they were furious that the house deal fell through and their names had ended up on paperwork they never agreed to. I didn't gloat. I just let it unfold. I watched from a distance. And in that space, I made something new. I adopted a second dog. A rescue. Smaller than Daisy, but equally sweet. I named her Olive. She had 3 legs and eyes like she had seen too much. Daisy took to her immediately, as if she recognized a kindred survivor. The 3 of us started walking longer loops. I stopped checking Instagram. I started painting again. I signed up for a weekend writing class. I started living a life I didn't need to post about to feel proud of. Then one day, Joy, the little girl who almost adopted Daisy, showed up again. Her mom emailed to say thank you for being kind about the mix-up. Said Joy had started volunteering at the shelter. That she was learning what it meant to love without owning. I smiled for an hour after reading that. Because love, real love, doesn't ask you to shrink. It invites you to grow. The final moment of closure came not in a courtroom or a confrontation, but in a quiet morning. I was at the dog park, Daisy and Olive both rolling in the grass, when a man sat beside me on the bench. He looked familiar. Turned out he was the owner of the house we almost bought. He said he'd remembered my name, remembered the look on my face when I'd stepped into that sunroom. He said he was glad we hadn't gone through with it. That the next buyers tried to tear out the garden and flooded the basement with a bad reno. The house deserved better, he said. I smiled.
So did I.
When I got home that day, I opened the drawer with the folder, everything I had collected, protected, prepared. I took it out, sat with it, then burned it, page by page, screenshot by screenshot. I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need proof. I had something better. My voice. My choices. My life. And Daisy. Always Daisy. Who never asked me to prove anything. Who just stayed. Who reminded me, every single day, what unconditional really means. This wasn't the end of a love story. It was the beginning of a better one. One I wrote for myself, and for anyone who's ever been asked to give up a part of their soul to make someone else feel whole. And the only house I needed now was the one where I could be fully myself, with muddy paw prints, late-night barking, mismatched pillows, and all. The problem with fire is that once you've lit it, even when it dies down, the air still tastes like smoke. I had thought letting go would be enough. I had thought choosing myself and burning the old paperwork would feel like the end. But closure doesn't always come with clean lines or final scenes. Sometimes it doubles back. And sometimes, the people you think you've left behind find a new way to claw into the next chapter. It started with a job offer. Not just any offer, an unexpected one. Emailed to my personal account, subject line glowing with potential. Opportunity with Bark and Bloom Media. They were a rising brand in the pet lifestyle space, partnering with shelters, rescues, and organic pet products. The kind of place that blended heart with strategy. I hadn't applied. One of their content leads had found me through a piece I had written on Medium about rescue animals and healing. They were expanding their team and wanted to talk.
I almost said no.
Old habits of shrinking kicked in. Who am I to take this? But Daisy was asleep beside my desk, her breathing slow and easy, and Olive was snoring from the rug with her mismatched socks half chewed beside her, and I realized I didn't need to ask permission anymore. I said yes. The interview went well. The role was flexible, remote, creative. Everything I had been quietly hoping to grow into. They sent the offer within a week, and I signed it with shaking hands and a smile so wide it hurt. I didn't tell anyone except Misha. I didn't want to jinx it. I just marked the calendar and celebrated with peanut butter treats for the dogs and a takeout pad thai for me. But 2 days before my start date, it happened. Another email. Anonymous sender. No name, no subject line. Just a screenshot. It was a post in a private Facebook group for small business owners. A warning. A name.
Mine.
The message claimed I had financial issues, had sabotaged a former fiancé's investment, and was emotionally unstable around animals. It didn't say outright that I shouldn't be hired, but it didn't need to. It was a subtle assassination, whispers in a room I wasn't invited into. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I picked up the phone and called Misha. She didn't hesitate. "We knew this might happen," she said. "He doesn't win if you don't let this stop you." I knew she was right, but I also knew I had to respond. Not emotionally.
Strategically.
I forwarded the message to HR at Bark and Bloom. I attached the file I hadn't fully deleted, the one with the timeline, the receipts, the flyers. I explained what had happened. I told them I wasn't asking for sympathy, just transparency. If this changed their decision, I understood. But I wouldn't let it hang in silence. I wouldn't be quiet to protect someone else's lie again. They replied within hours. The message was short. "Thank you for your honesty. We've seen things like this before. We believe you." That night, I cried harder than I had during the breakup. Not because I was hurt, but because I was finally believed and I hadn't even begged for it. The job began the following Monday. I built campaigns with stories like mine, people finding themselves through the animals who never judged them. I wrote copy for rescues. I filmed short reels of Daisy and Olive just being themselves, and they became tiny celebrities online. The work didn't fix everything, but it made me feel real again. Visible. And then the biggest twist yet dropped in my lap like a stone. It was a letter. Real paper. A clean envelope with my full name typed on the front. Inside, a legal notice. A claim. He was attempting to seek reimbursement for financial damages caused by breach of commitment and financial sabotage. He had turned the failed house deal into a formal complaint. Said he had lost potential investments. Claimed emotional and reputational harm. Said I had willfully interfered with his future stability. I stared at the papers. Not even surprised, just tired. Tired of the way some people weaponize bureaucracy when their words stop working. Tired of the way abusers turn into victims the moment you walk away. But this time I didn't panic. I emailed the notice to Nyla, my lawyer friend. She read it, laughed, and said, "This won't go anywhere. It's a scare tactic. But let's document everything, just in case." That night, I posted my story anonymously on a support forum for people leaving controlling relationships. I didn't mention names. I didn't drag anyone. I just told the truth. A few hours later, comments started rolling in. Messages from women and men who had given up parts of themselves to make someone else feel bigger. I read every one, cried through most, and I felt something new start to take root. Not just peace. Purpose. 2 weeks later, The legal notice was withdrawn.
Quietly. No paletí. No explanation. Just gone.
Nyla said he must have realized he had no ground to stand on. Or maybe someone convinced him he'd done enough damage. Either way, it didn't matter. He was done. But I wasn't. Because something strange happened after that. My story, the one I had posted anonymously, was shared, then quoted, then picked up by a small digital magazine, then another. And finally, someone from a larger outlet emailed me. Would I be open to being interviewed? Not just for the dog angle, but for the story of reclaiming your life after being emotionally erased. I said yes. The piece went live on a Wednesday. I didn't post it. I didn't share it. I just waited. And then one message came in, then 5, then 30. Strangers. Old classmates. A former professor. They said the story made them cry. That they saw themselves in it. That it helped them name what they'd been through. The last message I read before bed was from someone I hadn't heard from in a long time. His mother. She didn't say much. Just that she had read the article. That she didn't know the full truth before. That she was sorry. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some things weren't about being heard. Some things were about being done with silence. Daisy curled up beside me, Olive snoring at my feet, and I realized the house we never bought had never been the point. The walls I had wanted, the life I had imagined inside them. They were just shadows of what I had been taught to want. But what I had now was real. Warmth. Wholeness. And a life I hadn't compromised to keep. And still, the story wasn't over. The thing about closure is, no one tells you that it's not an event. It's not a confrontation or a moment when someone apologizes and the sky clears. It's a slow unwinding. A choice you make over and over until the version of yourself that begged for someone else's approval finally grows quiet. I had expected that walking away would be the hardest part. But staying away, that was the test. That was where the real healing hid. In the quiet hours. In the temptation to check. In the space where what if tries to rewrite your memory. I had stopped checking his social media. Stopped watching for signs. But one afternoon, a friend sent me a link. Thought you'd want to see this. It was a podcast episode. Real estate and entrepreneurship. The guest, him. I almost didn't listen. But curiosity whispered louder. So I pressed play. He talked about business, growth, branding. And then, without being asked, he started telling a story. About a breakup. How he'd been blindsided. How he'd been forced to choose between love and practicality, and how he was painted as the villain for making the hard calls. He never said my name, but he didn't have to. The narrative was crafted.
Smooth.
Rehearsed. He'd learned how to frame himself as the wounded one. The misunderstood one. The kind who lost everything just for wanting something better. I paused the episode halfway through. Not because it hurt. Because I was tired of watching people wrap cruelty in charm and sell it as growth. I walked to the window. Daisy was curled up on the porch, eyes blinking slowly in the sunlight. Olive was chasing shadows across the hardwood. And I realized I didn't need to defend myself anymore. People who know me know the truth. And people who don't, I no longer owe them explanations. But life, funny as it is, wasn't finished with its curveballs. It came through a phone call. From the rescue where I had adopted Daisy. A voice I hadn't heard in years, warm but cautious. They asked if I still had space. They had a situation. A senior dog. Abandoned. Nearly blind. Anxious. Needed a soft landing for a few months, maybe forever. I said yes before they finished the sentence. His name was Bramble. A bony shepherd mix with clouded eyes and a limp. He growled when I first approached him, then trembled when I touched his fur. But Daisy walked over, nosed him gently, then laid down beside him like she had known him forever. I knew in that moment this wasn't a burden. It was an answer. The version of myself who had once been asked to give up her dog for a dream house was now the one opening her door to a forgotten life and saying, "You matter too." I documented his care. I created a quiet series online. Healing with Bramble.
No sponsors. No brands.
Just truth. I talked about trust. About trauma. about how love isn't loud. Sometimes it's just presence. The videos gained traction. A few went viral. Comments came in from people who saw themselves in Bramble. Weathered, weary, still worth loving. For every heart I touched, I felt a thread mend inside me. The life I'd almost traded away was now a bridge for others finding their way home. And then one last twist. Joy showed up again. Not in person, not right away. Just a message. She had read an article, an old interview that had resurfaced. She remembered Daisy. She asked if she could come by sometime. I didn't say yes immediately. I waited. I thought. I talked to Misha. Then I replied, only if you're ready to see the truth. A week later, she came over. Taller now. Older. Quieter. She brought a box of old art supplies and said she'd always wanted to paint Daisy. That she remembered how I used to sit with her after piano practice and tell her that being brave didn't mean not being scared. It meant caring anyway. I showed her Bramble.
Told her his story.
She sat beside him for nearly an hour, not talking, just sketching his face. Before she left, she said, I'm sorry I didn't understand before. I think I do now. I didn't ask what her mother had told her. I didn't ask what version of me she'd been fed. I just let the apology be a seed. Maybe someday it would grow into something. The very last time I saw him, my ex, was by chance. I was speaking at a local shelter fundraiser. They had asked me to share my journey. I kept it clean. I told the truth, but not every sharp edge. Afterward, as people mingled, I saw him standing by the door, arms folded, watching. He didn't approach, just nodded once. I nodded back. That was it. No words, just a closing gesture. Like two actors leaving a stage for the final time, costumes off, the show over. And the final page turned months later, on a quiet Saturday morning. I had bought a small home. Not the dream house from the brochure. Not the open floor plan cathedral ceiling model that came with expectations and compromises. This one was smaller.
Cozy.
Had a fenced backyard where Bramble could wobble freely, where Olive could leap after bugs, and Daisy could bask in patches of sun.
It had a sunroom, though.
Not a fancy one. Just enough light for houseplants, and a chair where I rode in the mornings with tea. It smelled like safety. It sounded like wind and paws on hardwood. It felt like mine. One morning I pulled out a blank card. Wrote 2 simple sentences. I didn't lose anything. I found myself. I slipped it into a box with Daisy's puppy collar, a photo of the 3 dogs, and a printout of the email that once asked me to choose between love and convenience. Then I put the box on a high shelf, not as baggage but as record. Not all history is meant to be forgotten. Some of it becomes a compass. I no longer feared being erased, because I had written myself back into every page. So when people ask me now how I walked away from a man, a marriage, a house, how I gave it all up for a dog, I don't argue. I just smile and say, she gave it all back to me. And that's the truth. The house wasn't the dream.
She was.
I was. We both still are.